My son David and his wife Karen sat across from their lawyer in a sleek downtown office, looking for all the world like they had just won the lottery. They were confident, smug, and ready to sign the papers that would give them complete control over my life. To them, I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. "We have this," Karen said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I took it last week. I think it proves our point." She slid her phone across the polished mahogany desk. On the screen was a video of me, standing in my own backyard, looking lost among the rose bushes I had planted with my late husband. I was squinting, appearing confused, as Karen's voice from behind the camera asked if I remembered what day it was. They thought it was the final nail in my coffin, the perfect proof of my so-called cognitive decline. Their lawyer, a man whose suit probably cost more than my first car, watched the video without expression. He then picked up a thick courier envelope that had been sitting on his desk. He tapped it once, a sharp final sound in the quiet room. He looked up, not at the phone but directly into my son's eyes. "There's a problem," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "A very big one." To understand the look of pure shock that washed over their faces, you need to understand how we got there. That moment wasn't the start of the storm, it was the thunderclap after the lightning had already struck. It all started 2 months earlier, at a perfectly normal backyard BBQ. The suburbs in late summer have a particular smell, a mix of freshly cut grass, sizzling charcoal, and the faint, sweet scent of chlorine from a neighbor's pool. It's the smell of American comfort, of peaceful Saturday afternoons. My backyard was an oil painting of it. Kids I'd known since they were in diapers were chasing each other on the lawn, their parents were chatting in lawn chairs, and the big, gnarled oak tree my Frank planted, the year David was born, stood guard over all of us, its long branches offering shade just as they had for 40 years. It was a perfect scene. So perfect, in fact, that my daughter-in-law, Karen, was busy trying to capture it for her thousands of online followers. She held her phone at an unnatural angle, directing my son. "David, a little to the left. The light is better. Look like you're actually enjoying the burger, honey." David, ever the dutiful husband, shifted his 6-foot frame and took a theatrical bite of the cheeseburger I had just handed him. He was a real estate agent, and he always looked like he was posing for a billboard. His watch was too big, his polo shirt was too bright, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. He caught the eye of our neighbor Jim from across the yard. "Just sold a beauty over in the Creekside development," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Went for 10% over asking. The market's insane, but you gotta know how to play it." He was always selling. Selling himself, selling his success, selling the illusion that everything was as perfect as Karen's filtered photos. I carried a fresh bowl of potato salad out to the picnic table. I'd made a special trip to Costco that morning, stocking up on everything they liked. Karen glanced at the bowl, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in a tiny frown. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic, "is that the store-brand potato salad?" I paused, the heavy ceramic bowl suddenly feeling like a lead weight in my hands. "It's from the deli counter," I said quietly. "The one you all like." I meant, it's not the organic kind from Whole Foods, the one with the dill and the grain mustard. "I posted about it last week, remember?" she said, already turning back to her phone. "It's fine, I'm just watching my carbs anyway." I placed the bowl down on the checkered tablecloth. The small clink of ceramic on wood was the only sound I made, the only protest I had left in me. It was just potato salad, a silly, trivial thing. But it wasn't about the potato salad. It was about being seen, about being known. After 40 years of motherhood, I had become the woman who buys the wrong potato salad. Later, I was refilling the ice bucket when I heard David laughing with Jim by the grill. "Yeah, it's a great old house," David was saying. "Solid foundation. Frank built things to last. But it's a lot of upkeep for Mom, you know. 4 bedrooms for 1 woman. We're trying to tell her to think about downsizing, maybe a nice condo, something more manageable." My hand froze on the handle of the icebox. "Manageable." He said it so casually, as if he were discussing pruning a tree, not uprooting it. He was planting a seed, not for me but for the neighbors. He was crafting a narrative. The loving son, concerned for his aging mother who couldn't quite manage on her own anymore. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ice. I looked over at the oak tree, its thick trunk solid and unmoving. Frank had planted it as a sapling with his own 2 hands. He'd said, Evie, this is for our boy. So he'll always have roots. Now my boy was talking about tearing those roots up and potting me in a condo like a common houseplant. I retreated to the quiet of my kitchen, watching the party through the screen door. My family was gathered in the shade of the oak tree. David had his arm around Karen, and my grandson Leo had finally taken out his earbuds and was actually laughing at something his father said. From a distance, they were a portrait of happiness, the kind of family you see in commercials, the kind of family I had spent my entire life trying to build and hold together. Karen leaned in close to David, her voice a low, urgent murmur that the wind carried straight to my open window. The catering for the fundraiser is going to be $3,000, David. We have to look good. This is for your career as much as it is for my brand. I know, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm just stretched thin right now. The commission from the Creekside house won't hit for another month. Karen's eyes flickered over to the house, to my house. Her gaze was cold, calculating. It was the look of a hawk assessing its prey. Honestly, she whispered, and the words were so clear, I felt like she'd said them right into my ear. Your mother is becoming a liability. This huge house for one person? It's not practical. Liability. The word hit me harder than a slap. I wasn't a mother anymore. I wasn't a grandmother or the woman who hosted the neighborhood BBQs. I was a line item on a balance sheet. I was an asset that wasn't performing. I gripped the edge of the kitchen sink, my knuckles turning white, and stared out at the family gathered under the strong, silent branches of my husband's tree. They had no idea that I had heard them. They had no idea that in that one quiet moment, the woman who bought the wrong potato salad had just started to wake up. That night, and for the days that followed, the world looked different. A switch had been flipped inside my head, and suddenly, the soft, familiar comforts of my life were cast in a harsh, clinical light. The cheerful chime of the doorbell made me jump. The sound of David's car pulling into the driveway no longer brought a smile to my face. It brought a knot to my stomach. His hugs felt like he was measuring my shoulders for a coffin, and Karen's compliments on my garden sounded like a prospective buyer assessing a property. They were a pair of smiling assassins, and I, their cheerful, oblivious target, had just woken up. I started noticing things I'd been blind to for years. The way David's eyes would scan the living room, not with nostalgia but with appraisal, as if he were mentally cataloging the furniture for a future garage sale. The way Karen would pick up one of Frank's old woodworking projects, a little hand-carved box on the mantelpiece, and inspect it not for its sentimental value, but for a maker's mark that might suggest it was valuable. They moved through my life, through the home my husband and I had built from nothing, like ghosts from a greedy future, haunting me with what they wanted, not what we had shared. My house, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a museum of my own life, and my son was the curator just waiting for the main exhibit to die. I'd walk through the rooms, running my hand along the cool, smooth wood of the dining table where I'd served thousands of family meals, and a cold dread would wash over me. I wasn't just a liability to them. I was in the way. Then, on a Tuesday morning, about a week after the BBQ, the phone rang. It was a bright, sunny day. I was in Frank's old office, a room that still smelled faintly of sawdust and Old Spice, paying bills and sorting through paperwork. It was a normal, quiet morning. I expected it to be one of my friends from my gardening club, or maybe Leo, calling to ask if I could give him a ride, but it wasn't. "Evelyn Reed, please," a professional voice said. "This is she," I answered, pen poised over my checkbook. "Hi, Evelyn. This is Sarah Bishop from the Northwood Credit Union. How are you today?" I relaxed instantly. "Sarah, I'm doing just fine. How are those roses we talked about? Are they getting enough sun on your patio?" I'd known Sarah for nearly 20 years. She was a young teller with a bright smile when Frank and I came in, terrified, to apply for our first small business loan. She'd guided us through the paperwork, treated us with respect when we had nothing but a dream, and over the years had become the branch manager. She was a good person, the kind who remembered your name and asked after your family. "They're doing beautifully thanks to your advice," she said, but her voice was missing its usual warmth. It was tight, professional. "Listen, Evelyn, I'm actually calling for a slightly different reason. Just a courtesy call. We've had some, unusual activity flagged on your account, and I wanted to make sure you were aware." I put my pen down. The numbers on my electric bill suddenly seemed to blur. Unusual activity? I haven't used my card for anything but groceries this week. There was a slight hesitation on her end. Well, this was an online query. There was an attempt made yesterday evening to add a secondary user to your primary checking account. The user's name was Karen Reed. My blood ran cold. I sank back into Frank's worn leather chair, my hand gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles ached. Karen, of course. Trying to slither her way into my finances through the back door of the internet, assuming I was too old and clueless to notice. I did not authorize that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's what we thought, Sarah said, and I could hear the gentle sympathy in her voice. We denied the request, of course, since it didn't pass the security protocols. I just wanted you to know, maybe you should think about changing your passwords. There was a pause. And Evelyn, there's one more thing. This is the main reason I'm calling. I held my breath. We received a HELOC application against your property last week, a home equity line of credit. It's for a substantial amount. The preliminary paperwork was filed by David, as your son, and it's been flagged for final review and signature. My system just requires me to make a verification call to the primary property owner before we proceed. So, I'm calling to verify. The silence that followed was deafening. A HELOC. They wanted to borrow against my house, my home. The place where I'd brought my baby boy home from the hospital, the place where Frank had passed away peacefully in his own bed. They wanted to turn 40 years of our hard work, our sweat and sacrifice, into a line of credit to fund their lifestyle, to pay for their fundraisers and their oversized watches. It wasn't just about stealing my money anymore. This was a whole other ballgame. They were trying to steal the foundation from under my feet. I looked out the office window, past the neatly trimmed lawn, at the giant oak tree. Its branches stretched towards the sky, solid and defiant. Frank and I had weathered recessions, health scares, and the endless challenges of raising a family. We had held on. That tree and this house were my witnesses. They were my history. Evelyn, are you there? Sarah asked softly. I took a deep, steadying breath, my eyes fixed on the unshakable trunk of that tree. The fear that had been churning in my stomach for days began to cool, hardening into something else. Something solid and heavy. It felt like steel. Yes, Sarah, I'm here, I said, my voice calm and clear, a stranger to my own ears. Thank you for calling. And no, I am not verifying that application. Please cancel it immediately. Consider it fraudulent. Hanging up the phone felt like closing a door on one life and opening another. The cozy, sunlit world of my quiet retirement was gone, and in its place was a room with cold walls and sharp corners. There was no going back. The woman who had been afraid a week ago was now replaced by someone else, someone colder, someone who understood that if you find snakes in your garden, you don't just shoo them away. You find the nest. My first move was to play their game. They saw me as a dotty, sentimental old woman, so that's exactly who I would be. That afternoon I called David. "Honey, it's Mom," I said, injecting a wavering, fragile quality into my voice that I hadn't used in years. "I was just thinking about what you said at the BBQ, about the house being too much for me. You're right, I'm tired. I'd love to have you, Karen, and Leo over for Sunday dinner. We can talk about options." The bait was taken so fast it nearly took the rod with it. "Of course, Mom, we'd love to. Don't you worry about a thing, we'll figure it all out." I could practically hear the cash register ringing in his head. Sunday arrived, and I prepared the house not for a family dinner, but for an ambush. I cooked a pot roast, the kind Frank used to love, filling the house with the warm, comforting smell of home and happy memories. It was the perfect camouflage. While the roast simmered, I walked over to the fireplace mantel. Sitting in the center was a beautiful clock Frank had made years ago from a piece of solid oak. He'd carved tiny acorns and leaves into the wood. It hadn't worked in years, but I could never bear to get rid of it. It was a piece of him. With trembling hands, I gently pried open the back panel. Inside, among the silent brass gears, I placed a tiny, voice-activated recorder I had bought online, one of those gadgets marketed to college students for recording lectures. It was small, powerful, and completely invisible. As I snapped the panel shut, I felt a strange sense of calm. My husband, a man who had spent his life building things, was about to help me dismantle the mess our son had made. They arrived right on time, bearing a bottle of overpriced wine and smiles that were as fake as the silk flowers on Karen's dress. We sat around the dining table, the same table where I had cut David's birthday cakes for 40 years, and they talked at me, their words a dizzying swirl of financial jargon and empty reassurances. "We're thinking of a trust, Mom," David said, carving the roast with a little too much enthusiasm. "It just simplifies things, protects your assets. And there are some wonderful assisted living communities nearby," Karen chimed in. "They're more like resorts, really. Spas, social events. You'd have so much fun, and you wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I just smiled and nodded, playing my part. "It sounds lovely, dear, but it's a lot to think about. My head is just spinning." After dinner, I pushed myself up from the table with a theatrical sigh. "All this excitement, I think I need to go lie down for a little while. You three just make yourselves at home. There's dessert in the fridge." I walked back to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. But I didn't lie down. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my phone, and connected to the recorder's Bluetooth signal. I put in my earbuds and closed my eyes. The living room, just 50 feet away, came through as clear as if I were sitting right there with them, a ghost in my own home. For a moment, there was just the sound of clinking plates. Then, Karen's voice, sharp and impatient. "Well, that was painful. Is she always this slow?" "She's getting there," David replied, his voice low. "The head is spinning bit is new. That's good for us. Did you see the state of her checkbook? She's still balancing it by hand. It's pathetic." My eyes snapped open. Pathetic. "So, what's the next step?" Karen asked. "The HELOC was a bust. That credit union manager is too chummy with her." "Forget the HELOC," David said dismissively. "We go for the bigger prize. We need to get power of attorney. I've got a guy, a doctor, who can do an evaluation. For the right price, he'll write a report that says whatever we need it to say. We just need to build the case that she's losing it. Confused, forgetful, a danger to herself. And all the time I spend on her," Karen added, her voice thick with resentment. "Running her errands, taking her to appointments because she doesn't like to drive on the freeway. It's practically a part-time job. We deserve to be compensated for that." I lay back on my pillows, the cold, venomous words pouring into my ears. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about me being a liability. It was a hostile takeover. They were building a case against me, manufacturing a reality to suit their greed. I listened as they discussed how they would sell the house, what they would do with the money, how they would split up Frank's tools from the garage. Lying there in the dark, I felt the last vestiges of grief for the family I thought I had wither and die. They were gone. In their place were two strangers sitting on my sofa, surrounded by the ghosts of a happy life they were plotting to erase. I didn't feel sad anymore. I just felt the grim, quiet satisfaction of an engineer who has just heard the satisfying click of a trap well sprung. I had them. The words were captured, sealed inside my husband's beautiful, handcrafted clock, waiting for the right time to strike. After they left, the house was unnervingly silent. The lingering smell of pot roast and Karen's expensive perfume hung in the air, a sickly sweet combination of love and betrayal. I waited a full hour, my heart hammering against my ribs, before I walked back into the living room. My hands were steady as I opened the back of Frank's old oak clock. I retrieved the small black rectangle of the recorder, a piece of cold, modern technology hidden inside a vessel of warm, handcrafted love. It felt heavy in my palm, heavy with the weight of their words, heavy with the truth I could no longer ignore. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their voices, slicing through my memories, rewriting the story of my life with their greed. Just before midnight, I found myself drawn to Frank's office. I hadn't touched much in here since he'd passed. His favorite flannel shirt was still draped over the back of his chair. The air still smelled of him sawdust, coffee, and the faint, clean scent of the linseed oil he used to polish his creations. It was my favorite room in the house, a sanctuary of quiet competence and steady strength. It was the room where our family's future had been mapped out on drafting paper and secured in neat columns of black ink. I ran my hand over his old drafting table, its surface scarred with the history of 100 projects. My fingers found the handle of the wide, shallow drawer where he kept his finished plans. I pulled it open. Tucked beneath a rolled-up blueprint for our neighbor's deck lay a thick, green accounting ledger. It was worn at the edges, the cover softened with age and use. I lifted it out. Its weight was familiar, comforting. For the first 20 years of our marriage, this book had been our Bible. I carried it to his desk, settled into his chair, and opened it under the warm glow of his old brass lamp. The pages were filled with two kinds of handwriting: Frank's bold, slightly slanted script, and my own neat, careful cursive. We were right there, on the page, side by side. Partners. My finger traced a line from 1,983. Materials for the Miller kitchen remodel, $212.50. I remembered that job. Frank had worked 16-hour days, and I'd been pregnant with David, painting cabinets until my back screamed in protest. A few lines down, another entry from me. Final payment received, $1,200. I could still feel the dizzying relief of that deposit, the knowledge that we would make rent that month. I kept turning the pages, a lifetime of work recorded in black and blue ink. Each entry was a memory, a small battle fought and won. Then I saw it. An entry from our first year in business, written in my hand, loan from Evelyn's personal savings for down payment on the Rockwell job, $5,000. And right below it, a year later, in Frank's proud script, paid in full, with interest, to my partner in all things. The ink on the page blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I was suddenly no longer in this quiet, lonely office. I was back in our cramped two-bedroom apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the temperamental furnace. I was 28 years old, my belly swollen with our son, and our kitchen table was covered not with food, but with blueprints, invoices, and a mountain of receipts I was trying to sort. Frank was slumped over the table, his head in his hands, his usual optimism completely gone. The Rockwell job, a big commercial contract that could have been our ticket to a real future, was about to slip through his fingers because we couldn't afford the upfront cost of the materials. "It's no use, Evie," he'd murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The bank won't give us another dime. We're done." I had stopped my work, walked over to him, and placed my hand on his shoulder. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I went to our bedroom and came back with my passbook from the savings and loan. It contained every penny I had saved since I was a teenager, money I'd been setting aside for the baby. I placed it on the table on top of the blueprint. "Here," I'd said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "It's $5,000. Is it enough?" He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else, a kind of reverent awe that made my cheeks burn. "Evelyn, that's your money. For the baby. I can't take that." "It's not my money, Frank," I'd told him, placing my hand on my belly. "It's our money. It's for our baby's future. And his future is the business we build together. I believe in this. And I believe in you." I sat there in the silence of his office, the memory as vivid as the ledger in front of me. That $5,000 was the seed from which all of this had grown: this house, our savings, the comfortable life David and Karen took for granted, the life they now felt so entitled to. It wasn't a gift from Frank. It was our creation. It was built with my faith and his skill, with our sleepless nights and our shared sacrifice. It was our sweat equity poured into the foundation of our family. And as I sat there, the weight of that truth settled over me. They weren't just trying to steal my house and my money, they were trying to erase me from my own story. They saw Frank as the builder, the earner, the one who had left a valuable legacy, and they saw me as the keeper of that legacy, a glorified security guard who had outlived her usefulness. They had no idea that I wasn't the guard. I was the architect, right alongside him. I closed the ledger gently. The grief that had been choking me all night was finally gone. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. This was not just about protecting my assets. This was about defending my life, my contribution, my partnership with the man I loved. This was about honoring the woman who had pushed all her chips onto the table for a shared dream, and the man who had honored her as his partner in all things. They had forgotten who I was. It was time to remind them. But a reminder wasn't something you shouted from the rooftops. It was something you delivered quietly, precisely, and with undeniable force. My son and his wife were playing a game of suburban chess, seeing me as a helpless pawn ready to be sacrificed. They had no idea I had been a queen all along. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer from an ad on the back of the phone book. That would be a messy, public affair, full of accusations and drama. My fight wouldn't be won in a shouting match. It would be won in silence, on paper, in the places they had never bothered to look. I needed a partner, but not just any partner. I needed someone from the world Frank and I had built, someone who understood the language of foundations and blueprints, someone who knew the difference between a house and a home. I needed George. George Reynolds had been Frank's business partner for 30 years. He was a gruff, stocky man with hands like worn leather and a voice that sounded like gravel rolling downhill. Since Frank died, I only saw him once a year when he'd stop by with a poinsettia at Christmas, making awkward small talk for 10 minutes before retreating back to his semi-retired life of fishing and complaining about property taxes. To David and Karen, he was just a relic, another one of Dad's old cronies. They had no idea he was the executor of Frank's will and the sharpest mind I knew. I met him at the Round Table, a diner off the interstate where the coffee is always a little burnt and the waitresses have been there since the dawn of time. It was our old spot, where Frank and George had sketched out plans on paper napkins for decades. I slid into a cracked red vinyl booth and ordered 2 black coffees. George arrived 5 minutes later, his brow furrowed with concern. "Evelyn, you sounded urgent on the phone. Everything all right?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small digital recorder, and slid it across the table next to the sugar dispenser. "I need you to listen to something, George." I pressed play. I watched his face as the sound of my family's voices filled the small space between us. I saw his jaw tighten as he heard David talk about my pathetic checkbook. I saw a flash of raw anger in his pale blue eyes when Karen called me a liability. And when they got to the part about hiring a crooked doctor to have me declared incompetent, he slowly reached out and pressed the stop button. The silence in the diner rushed back in, broken only by the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. He stared at the recorder for a long moment, then looked at me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at his best friend's grieving widow, he was looking at a peer. "The little vultures," he said, his voice a low growl. "What do you want to do?" "I'm not interested in a family feud," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "I'm interested in a corporate restructuring. They see me as a failing enterprise, so I'm going to protect my assets and reorganize the board." A slow smile spread across George's weathered face. "I've missed this, Evie. You were always the strategist. Frank and I didn't just put our profits in a savings account, George. You know that. We invested. David knows about the stocks and the retirement funds. He has no idea about the land." This was the part of the ledger they had never seen, the part I had managed myself after Frank was gone. Over the years, on George's advice, we had bought up several parcels of undeveloped land way out on the county line. David, in his obsession with pristine suburban cul-de-sacs, had once dismissed it as worthless scrubland. He had no idea that the city's expansion was heading right for it like a slow-motion tidal wave. "I want you to help me," I said, my voice firm. "I want to create an ironclad family trust. Effective immediately. I want every significant asset I have, the house, the portfolio, and all the land parcels moved into it. My name as the sole trustee. The beneficiary will be Leo, and only upon his completion of a 4-year college degree, with a morality clause so airtight that a parking ticket would put his inheritance in jeopardy." George whistled softly. "You're not just building a wall, you're building Fort Knox. What about David?" "David and Karen are to be explicitly written out. They get nothing, not a dime, not a splinter of wood from the garage." I pushed a piece of paper across the table. It was a list of the properties. George scanned it, his eyebrows shooting up when he got to the last 2 items. "The Fairview parcels? Evie, are you sure you want to lock those away in the trust?" "Actually," I said, leaning forward, "those are the only 2 I don't want in the trust. I want you to sell them. Immediately." George's eyes widened. "You've seen the news then? The city council approved the zoning change last month. They're putting in a new tech campus right next door. That land, it's not scrubland anymore. It's a gold mine." I gave him the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. It felt powerful. It felt like coming home to myself. "I know," I said. "The timing is perfect." The timing was perfect. While George was busy in the background, moving mountains and building fortresses with paperwork and legal clauses, my job was on the front lines. My job was to become the woman they believed I already was. With my assets secured and my strategy in motion, I was no longer a target. I was the bait, and it was time to set the trap. The performance began subtly. I started misplacing things, my reading glasses, the remote control, my car keys. I'd call David in a manufactured panic, only to find the keys a few minutes later in a silly place like the sugar bowl. "Oh goodness," I'd say, my voice trembling just so. I don't know what's wrong with my head these days. On the other end of the line, I could hear the grim satisfaction in his silence. Every forgotten appointment, every repeated question was another brick in the wall of evidence he was building against me. I was handing him the very stones he would use to stone me, and he was too arrogant to ever question where they came from. It was a strange and bitter pill to swallow, playing the part of the frail, forgetful creature they so desperately wanted me to be. There were moments when I'd catch my reflection in a window, my face arranged in a mask of vacant confusion, and I wouldn't recognize myself. It was a violation of my own spirit, a daily act of self-erasure. But with every condescending pat on the arm from my son, with every saccharine, pitying look from my daughter-in-law, the steel inside me grew colder and harder. They thought they were watching a slow decline. I knew they were watching a masterclass. The day of their big move came on a Thursday. David called that morning, his voice oozing with a false cheerfulness that turned my stomach. "Hey, Mom. A friend of mine, a specialist in elder care, is going to be in the neighborhood this afternoon. I thought it would be great if he just dropped by for an informal chat. No pressure, just a friendly conversation." A specialist, the hired gun. The curtain was about to go up on the main event. "Oh, I don't know, dear," I said, letting my voice flutter with anxiety. "Doctors make me so nervous." "It'll be fine, Mom. He's a lovely man, Dr. Finch. We'll be right there with you." "Well, if you think it's best," I whispered. I had him. Hours before they arrived, I made my final preparations. On the windowsill in the living room sat a small, intricately carved birdhouse. It was one of Frank's last projects, a perfect replica of our own home, complete with tiny shutters and a little porch swing. He had never gotten around to putting it up outside. It was a beautiful, sentimental object that no one ever paid much attention to. And inside the small, dark opening where a bird might have built its nest, I placed a tiny camera, no bigger than my thumbnail. Its lens had a perfect, unobstructed bird's-eye view of the entire room. When the doorbell rang at 2 o'clock, I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my cardigan, and opened the door with a slightly bewildered smile. There was David, looking concerned. There was Karen, looking predatory. And between them stood a man with a cheap suit, a tired face, and the emptiest eyes I had ever seen. Dr. Finch. They settled him into Frank's favorite armchair, directly across from me. The performance of my life had begun. "So, Evelyn," Dr. Finch started, his smile as thin as a razor blade. "David tells me you've been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately." I twisted the fabric of my sleeve in my hands. "Oh, I just get so tired. And things get mixed up in my head sometimes. Just this morning, I was looking for the salt and I found it in the laundry room. Can you imagine?" Karen shot David a triumphant look. The doctor leaned forward. "Can you tell me what year it is, Evelyn?" I looked at him, my eyes wide and blank. I let the silence stretch out, filling the room with my manufactured confusion. Is it 1998? No, that's not right, is it? Frank would know." David cleared his throat, placing a sheaf of papers on the coffee table. "Mom, this is just some paperwork Dr. Finch recommended we go over. It would allow me to help you with your bills, your finances, just to take the burden off you." I stared at the documents, a sea of fine print and legal clauses. It was a durable power of attorney, the keys to my kingdom. "Oh, David," I murmured, pushing the papers away gently. "There are so many words. My head just gets fuzzy with all these numbers." I looked at Dr. Finch, tears welling in my eyes. It was easier when my Frank was here. He handled everything. We built this whole life, you know. He'd come home with his hands all rough from the wood and the work, and he'd plant trees for the birds. I let my voice trail off, my gaze drifting to the window, to the birdhouse. He loved the little wrens. It was a masterful performance, a symphony of confusion, grief, and vulnerability. I was everything they wanted me to be, a senile old woman, lost in the past, incapable of managing her own affairs, ready to be led gently into the cage they had built for her. When they finally left an hour later, they were glowing with success. David gave my shoulder a firm, proprietary squeeze. Karen kissed the air beside my cheek, her perfume leaving a toxic cloud behind her. "You just rest, Evelyn," she cooed. "We'll take care of everything from here." I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my body trembling with the effort of it all. I walked to the window and looked out at the birdhouse. The tiny dark eye of the camera had seen it all. The coercive questions, the condescending smiles, the legal documents they tried to trick me into signing. They had their evidence, their star witness. They had the video that would, in their minds, seal my fate. They had no idea I had just handed them the perfectly wrapped gift of their own destruction. And like greedy children on Christmas morning, they tore into it with gusto. In the days that followed, their confidence was suffocating. David's phone calls, once tinged with a thin veneer of respect, became blunt and directive. He didn't ask about my day. He informed me of my schedule. "Mom, I've arranged for the gardener to come on Tuesday, not Wednesday. I'll handle the payment," he'd say, the unspoken words hanging in the air, "because you can't be trusted to. And I've switched your prescriptions over to an automatic delivery service," he'd add. "That way you won't forget to pick them up again." To each new instruction, each fresh condescension, I would reply with a meek, "Oh, of course, dear, whatever you think is best." I was a ghost in my own life, a powerless passenger in a car being driven off a cliff by my own son. The slow burn of their disrespect was becoming a searing daily agony. I had to keep my eyes fixed on the final destination, on the cold, sweet relief of the crash that I knew was coming, the one I myself was engineering. Karen, for her part, communicated mostly through text messages, sending me links to articles about the top 5 luxury senior living communities in the state, complete with pictures of smiling, silver-haired residents playing pickleball and attending watercolor classes. "See how happy you could be?" the text screamed. "If you would just get out of our way." The official notice came on a Monday. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when the phone rang. It was a man's voice I didn't recognize, smooth and detached. He introduced himself as Arthur Vance, my son's attorney. "Ma'am, I'm calling to inform you that a petition for conservatorship has been filed with the county court on your behalf," he said, his tone as sterile as a hospital room. "A hearing has been scheduled for the 15th of next month. You will be served with the official papers shortly." I leaned against the counter, feigning a breathless confusion that was becoming second nature to me. "A petition? I don't understand. David is handling everything for me. Is something wrong?" I heard him sigh on the other end of the line, a little puff of patronizing air. It was the sigh of a busy man dealing with a confused old woman. "Your son is simply taking the necessary legal steps to protect your interests, Mrs. Reed. It's all quite standard. You have nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about. I hung up the phone, my hand perfectly steady. They had done it. They had actually done it. The trap, so carefully baited and set, had finally been sprung. That night I felt a restless energy I couldn't shake. I knew they would be celebrating. I could picture them in their oversized mortgage to the Hilt House, toasting their success. On a whim, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I opened my tablet and navigated to Karen's Instagram page. And there it was. The photo was professionally lit, taken at what was clearly one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. David and Karen were clinking champagne glasses, their faces glowing with victory. David's smile was wide and triumphant. Karen was looking at him with a gaze of pure adoration, a look she had probably practiced in the mirror. It was a perfect portrait of love and success. But it was the caption that stopped my heart. "To new beginnings and making the tough decisions for the ones we love," she had written. "So proud of my amazing husband for stepping up and taking charge when it matters most. It's not always easy, but it's what family does. Number family first. Number legacy number. Protecting our own. Number making memories." I stared at the screen, the light from the tablet illuminating the dark room. Family first. Legacy. The hypocrisy was so profound, so utterly shameless, that it took my breath away. They were celebrating the legal erasure of my personhood, the planned theft of my entire life's work, and they were dressing it up in the language of love and duty for the whole world to see. They were toasting my execution and calling it an act of family devotion. A rage unlike anything I had ever felt in my 70 years of life washed over me. It was a pure, white-hot fire that burned away all the grief, all the hurt, all the lingering traces of the mother who had once loved the man in that picture. I looked up from the screen and out the window at the old oak tree. Its massive silhouette was black against the deep blue of the evening sky, a silent, powerful witness. Frank and I had built a real legacy, a legacy of hard work, of partnership, of love, a legacy written in an old green ledger and carved into the very bones of this house. And these two pretenders in their fancy restaurant thought that legacy was something you could steal and hashtag. I saved a screenshot of the post. It was a beautiful photo. It would look perfect as Exhibit A. They were celebrating, convinced they had already won. They had no idea that the real game hadn't even begun. The morning of the meeting, I didn't go to the lawyer's office. That was their battlefield, a place of aggression and posturing. My war was already won, fought in quiet rooms and on the private pages of my past. While they were putting on their power suits, I was in my garden, pruning Frank's roses. The air was cool and clean, and the only sound was the steady snip of my shears. I could picture the scene downtown perfectly. The conference room on the 30th floor, with its panoramic view of the city I had watched grow for 50 years. The long, intimidating mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine. My son, David, would be sitting tall, radiating an unearned confidence. Karen would be beside him, a portrait of concerned elegance, her fingers probably tapping impatiently on her phone. Their lawyer, Arthur Vance, would be shuffling papers, eager to get this simple matter over with. They began, I was later told, with their star witness. "Before we dive into the legal framework, Mr. Vance," Karen said, her voice smooth as silk, "I think this video will make the situation perfectly clear. On a large screen at the end of the room, the footage from my living room appeared. There I was, the star of their little production, looking frail and lost in my own armchair. The audio was crystal clear. I heard myself ask what year it was. I saw myself stare blankly at the power of attorney document. I watched my own heartbreakingly convincing performance of a woman at the end of her rope. As the video played, I could imagine the smug, triumphant look on Karen's face. She thought she was presenting an open and shut case. In reality, she was presenting my masterpiece. Just as the video faded to black, there was a sharp knock on the conference room door. A young paralegal entered and placed a thick, cream-colored courier envelope in front of Mr. Vance. He picked it up, a flicker of annoyance on his face at the interruption. He slid it open with a silver letter opener. As he scanned the contents, the confident set of his shoulders began to slump. A deep line formed between his eyebrows. He read it a second time. He looked up, the color draining from his face, and his eyes, now stripped of all condescension, landed on my son. "There's a problem," he said, his voice flat. "A very big one." The door opened again before David could respond. Two people walked in. The first was George Reynolds, my husband's old partner, his face set like granite. The second was a woman in a perfectly tailored gray suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. This was Catherine Albright, my new legal counsel. She didn't look like a lawyer who handled messy family disputes. She looked like a lawyer who dismantled corporations. She placed her briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive click. "Arthur," she said, her voice calm and dangerously pleasant, "I believe you've been misinformed about the state of my client, Mrs. Evelyn Reed." The next 20 minutes, as George later recounted, were a masterclass in controlled demolition. Catherine Albright didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply presented the facts, each one a perfectly aimed torpedo that blew a hole in their case. First, she slid a sworn affidavit from Sarah Bishop at the Northwood Credit Union across the table, detailing the fraudulent attempt to access my accounts and the illicit HELOC application. Vance's face paled as he read it. Next, she placed a small digital player on the table. "I'd also like to play a recording for you," she said, "taken during a recent Sunday dinner at my client's home." She pressed a button. The room was filled with the sound of their own voices, their plot to hire a crooked doctor, David's resentment, Karen's transactional complaints. I could imagine the blood draining from David's face, the mask of composure on Karen's cracking into a million pieces. "Mr. Reed," Catherine said into the deafening silence, "is that your voice discussing a plan to build the case, that your mother is a danger to herself?" David just opened and closed his mouth, a fish gasping for air. But the final blow was the quietest. Catherine reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single glossy piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a press release from a national real estate journal, dated that very morning. She slid it to the center of the table. "And finally," she said, "I know you've been concerned about Mrs. Reed's financial well-being. Please, Allow me to set your minds at ease." David and Karen stared at the paper. I knew what they were seeing. A headline: Tech giant finalizes land acquisition for new North Star campus in Fairview County. And a few paragraphs down, a quote from the developer, George Reynolds, confirming the sale of the 2 key parcels of land on behalf of the primary owner. "As you can see," Catherine concluded, her voice as cool and sharp as ice, "my client's financial acumen, which she honed while co-founding Reed Construction, remains as sharp as ever. The sale of the Fairview parcels was finalized at 6 a.m. this morning, for a sum of $8,700,000. The number just hung there in the air. $8.7 million. That morning in my garden, I had snipped the head off a dead rose. A clean cut. The end of something that was once beautiful, making way for new growth. In that sterile room downtown, my son and his wife were feeling that same clean cut. The end of their plans. The end of their entitlement. The end of the inheritance they thought was already theirs. They had come to that meeting to take everything from me. They had left with absolutely nothing. The fallout wasn't a loud explosion. It was a slow, silent collapse, the way a building groans and gives way internally long before the walls come crashing down. There were no screaming phone calls from David, no tearful pleas from Karen. There was just a profound and telling silence. They had played their hand and lost so completely that there was nothing left to say. They had become irrelevant to my life in the span of a single afternoon. But the world they had built for themselves, a world of appearances propped up by debt and deceit, began to crumble almost immediately. News in a town like this travels faster than a summer thunderstorm. It starts with whispers over picket fences, then moves to hushed conversations in the aisles of the grocery store. David, a real estate agent whose entire career depended on a reputation of trust, was the first to fall. The head of his brokerage, a man who had attended our BBQs for years, called me personally. His voice was heavy with embarrassment. He apologized for his agent's unconscionable behavior and assured me David's license had been suspended pending a full ethical review by the state board. David hadn't just lost a job, he'd lost his profession. The career he'd used as a shield of success and superiority was gone. Karen's demise was more public and far more brutal. Her carefully curated online world of perfection was her greatest vulnerability. The story of their failed conservatorship attempt was leaked to a local news blog anonymously, of course, but I have my suspicions it was a paralegal from Vance's office who still had a conscience. The story went viral in our community. I didn't have to look for the consequences. They were sent to me. Friends from my gardening club, my neighbors, even my dental hygienist, forwarded me screenshots of Karen's Instagram page, their messages filled with horrified support for me. Her comment section, once a pristine garden of fawning praise and heart emojis, had become a wasteland. "Number family first? More like number fraud first," one comment read. "I can't believe I ever took lifestyle advice from someone who would do this to their own mother-in-law." Unfollowed. That number legacy you're talking about? You mean the one you tried to steal from a senior citizen? You are despicable." The hashtags she had so proudly used to announce her victory were now being used as weapons against her. Then came the corporate exodus. The organic meal prep company posted a statement about their commitment to family values and announced they were terminating their partnership with her, effective immediately. The local luxury car dealership that sponsored her monthly On the Go with Karen segment pulled her ads. One by one, the brands that had paid to be associated with her perfect life ran for the hills. She wasn't an influencer anymore. She was a pariah. The final, inevitable blow came about a month later. I was in my yard, weeding the flower beds at the base of the old oak tree, when I saw the truck pull up in front of their house down the street. A man got out and hammered a sign into their perfectly manicured lawn. The sign was a stark, brutal red and white. For sale. Their beautiful, oversized house, the one they had tried to leverage my own home to pay for, was on the market. The foundation of their life had been a mirage, and it was finally evaporating in the harsh light of the truth. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. I felt no joy, no triumphant surge of victory. I just felt a profound and weary sadness. I looked at the solid, unyielding trunk of the oak tree Frank had planted. Its roots ran deep, holding it fast to the earth. It had weathered storms and droughts, and it still stood, providing shade and shelter. It was a real legacy. It was the truth. Their house, down the street, was just a collection of wood and drywall, a stage for a play that had closed for good. Staring at that for sale sign, I realized this was never about winning. It was about surviving. It was about protecting the ground beneath my feet, the roots that Frank and I had planted together so long ago. I hadn't wanted their world to burn down. But they had built it with stolen matches, and they had only themselves to blame for the ashes. I thought that would be the end of it, that the silence from their side of the family would be permanent. I was content with that. I had my garden, my home, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the foundations Frank and I had laid were unshakable. But a few weeks later, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't the sharp, impatient rap of a delivery person. It was a soft, hesitant tapping, almost like the sound of a bird pecking at the wood. I opened the door, and there on my porch stood my grandson, Leo. The change in him was startling. The sullen, entitled teenager from the BBQ was gone. This version of Leo looked thinner, and the expensive brand-name clothes had been replaced with a plain gray t-shirt and worn-out jeans. He stood with his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the welcome mat, unable to meet my gaze. He was holding a worn baseball cap in his hands, twisting it over and over. For a long moment, I said nothing. A part of me, the part that was still raw and wounded, wanted to close the door. But then I saw his hands. They were trembling. He was just a boy, a 17-year-old boy standing on the precipice of the ruin his parents had created. "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "You should come in." He shuffled inside, looking around the familiar hallway as if seeing it for the first time. I didn't lead him to the formal living room, the scene of so many of our family's charades. I took him to the kitchen. I poured him a tall glass of iced tea, the way I used to when he was a little boy and would come over after school, his knees skinned from playing outside. He sat at the small kitchen table, the one where he used to do his homework, and just stared into the glass. "Grandma," he finally said, his voice cracking, I'm so sorry." I sat down across from him. I waited. "I knew what they were doing was wrong," he mumbled, still looking at the table. "I heard them talking. About the money? And you." I didn't say anything. I just wanted that car they promised me for graduation. I wanted the stuff. I went along with it. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a shame so profound it was painful to see. "They lost their minds, Grandma. The more they talked about the money, the crazier they got. It's all they cared about." He took a shaky breath. "I haven't talked to them much since they sold the house. They're staying with friends. They just yell at each other all day. They blame you. They blame the economy. They blame everyone but themselves." I listened, my heart aching with a complicated mix of pity and sorrow. This was the true cost of their greed, the real collateral damage, their own son. "And what do you think, Leo?" I asked quietly. "I think," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength, "I think you and Grandpa built everything from nothing. I've seen the pictures. I've heard the stories. And all I ever learned was how to spend. I don't want to be like that anymore." He pushed his untouched glass of iced tea away and stood up, as if he couldn't bear to accept even that small kindness until he'd said what he came to say. "That's why I'm here. I'm not asking for money. I swear. I was wondering if maybe I could mow your lawn for you, or help with the weeding in the garden. I know I don't know much, but I can learn. I want to earn my keep. I'll do anything." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see David's son or Karen's project. I saw a boy who was trying to find his way back to solid ground. He was the grandson of a builder, a boy with Frank's blood in his veins, and for the first time in his life, he was asking for a tool instead of a handout. His parents had been a terminal rot, a sickness of the soul that had to be cut away. But Leo was just a branch that had been bent by a storm, and a bent branch with a little care could grow straight again. I didn't give him a lecture. I didn't need to. He had learned the hardest lesson of all on his own. I simply stood up, walked to the hook by the back door where the keys to the garden shed hung, and took down the key to the lawnmower. I placed it in his palm. His hand closed around it like a lifeline. "The grass out back is getting a little long," I said. "You can start there." A few moments later, I heard the sputtering cough of the lawnmower engine, followed by a steady, determined roar. It was the sound of a small engine, but to me it sounded like the whole world shifting on its axis. It was the sound of work being done, the sound of a new beginning. That was 6 months ago. The seasons have turned, and with them, the pages of our lives. Leo is here most afternoons now. The lawn is perfectly manicured. The gardens have never looked better, but his work has moved beyond the yard. More often than not, I'll find him in Frank's old office, hunched over the drafting table, carefully studying the old blueprints. He has his grandfather's focus, a quiet intensity I had never seen in him before. He's learning the difference between a load-bearing wall and a cosmetic one, between a house's price and its value. He is learning the language of his legacy, not as an inheritance to be claimed, but as a craft to be mastered. He's earning it. Our relationship isn't one of a doting grandmother and a grateful boy. It's a partnership, a mentorship. We go over contracts together. He helps me manage the portfolio. Last week, he pointed out an inconsistency in a property tax assessment that saved us thousands of dollars. He has my eye for numbers and Frank's instinct for structure. The son I had raised had tried to tear down my life's work, but the grandson I was now getting to know was helping me build a new one. And we are building. The sale of the Fairview land wasn't a windfall for me to squirrel away for a lonely old age. It was seed money. Last month, I stood on a dusty plot of land not 5 miles from here and watched as a construction crew broke ground on the first project of the Reed Foundation. Our mission is simple. We build and manage affordable, high-quality housing communities for seniors. These aren't sterile nursing homes or sad, lonely condos. They are real homes, with gardens and workshops and spaces for people to live with dignity and purpose. I stood there, a hard hat on my head, the plans for the community center clutched in my hand, and I felt Frank's presence beside me more strongly than I had in years. This was our work. This was our sweat equity. Still growing, still sheltering people. I don't hear from David or Karen anymore. Their names are ghosts at a feast I no longer attend. I know they finalized their divorce a few months ago, another casualty of the truth. I hope, for their sakes, that they one day find something real to build a life upon, something that isn't made of envy and air, but their story is no longer my story. I have closed that book. Sometimes, in the evening, I'll sit in the kitchen and look out at the great oak tree, its branches dark against the twilight sky. I think about the different kinds of family, the kind you are born into, which can be a lottery of love or a prison of obligation, and the kind you build. The family I have now is small, but it is strong. It's me and Leo, a boy finding his roots. It's George, who still comes over for coffee and argues with me about lumber prices. It is a family built not on blood, but on shared respect and a common purpose, a foundation that is solid. They tried to turn the last page of my story for me, to write an ending where I was frail and forgotten, but they forgot one crucial thing. I was the one holding the pen. My whole life, I had been a partner, a strategist, a builder, hiding in plain sight as a mother and a wife. The fire I found inside me wasn't new. It had just been banked, waiting for a reason to burn bright again. So let me ask you, if you discovered that your story was bigger and more powerful than you had ever been led to believe, would you have the courage to write it? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the strength you never knew you had.